On the morning of February 19th, 1945 at 0630 hours, Lieutenant Colonel James Kinnard crouched behind a Sherman tank on the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, staring at what looked like empty hillside through his binoculars. The 5th Marine Division had been fighting for 18 hours, firing thousands of rounds at an enemy they could barely see. Sulfur smoke drifted across the barren landscape, mixing with the acrid smell of cordite and diesel fumes from the idling tanks. Radio static crackled through his headset as squad leaders reported the same thing over and over. No targets, no movement, no kills. At 32 years old, Kinnard was a veteran of Guadalcanal and Bougainville, but he had never faced anything like this. The Japanese weren't retreating, weren't charging, weren't even shooting back most of the time. They had simply vanished into the island itself. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had spent 8 months turning Iwo Jima into something no Marine had ever encountered. 16,000 feet of interconnected tunnels snaked beneath the surface, connecting caves, bunkers, and hidden firing positions across the entire 8-square-mile island. While American intelligence predicted a conventional beach defense, followed by a fighting retreat to the interior, Kuribayashi had designed something far more sinister. His 22,000 defenders could appear anywhere, strike from any direction, then disappear back underground before the Marines could return fire. They moved through the tunnels like blood through veins, invisible and untouchable. Captain Eugene Sledge watched his demolition teams set satchel charges at what appeared to be a cave entrance, following doctrine that had worked on every other Pacific island. Blast the opening, clear the debris, move forward. But when the smoke cleared, muzzle flashes erupted from 3 other positions they hadn't even known existed, connected by tunnels that honeycombed the volcanic rock. His men dove for cover as rifle fire came from above, below, and both flanks simultaneously. The cave they had just blown was empty, but the Japanese soldiers who had been inside it were now firing from somewhere else entirely. Sledge realized with growing dread that they weren't fighting an army, they were fighting the island itself. For the first 4 days of the battle, Marines advanced using every tactic they knew. Flamethrower teams burned out cave mouths while riflemen provided cover. Sherman tanks fitted with flamethrowers, nicknamed Zippos, rolled forward to incinerate suspected positions. Engineers blasted openings with demolition charges, then infantry cleared the smoking tunnels, room by room. But for every position they cleared, 10 more opened fire. For every tunnel they fought through, 20 more remained untouched. The Japanese defenders weren't trying to hold ground. They were trying to bleed the Marines dry, one tunnel at a time. By February 23rd, Kinnard's regiment had suffered 300 casualties and advanced less than 400 yards. His men were exhausted, demoralized, and beginning to whisper that Iwo Jima was impossible. That night, as corpsmen carried stretchers past his command post, and engineers reported finding yet another network of connected caves, Kinnard made a decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to kill every defender in every tunnel, what if they simply sealed the tunnels shut? But the Japanese soldiers had no idea that their impenetrable fortress was about to become their tomb. The first Marine to die on Iwo Jima never saw his killer. Private First Class Robert Martinez of San Antonio stepped off Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel 732 at 0915 hours on February 19, 1945, his boots sinking into coarse black sand that felt like walking on crushed glass. The beach stretched before him, eerily quiet except for the distant rumble of naval gunfire and the mechanical grinding of Sherman tanks rolling off LSTs. Martinez shouldered his M1 Garand and jogged toward the first terrace of volcanic ash, following Lieutenant Kowalski's hand signals toward what intelligence had marked as a Japanese pillbox. The concrete structure sat silent and apparently abandoned, its firing slits dark as empty eye sockets. Martinez was 6 feet away when the machine gun opened fire from a position 30 yards to his left, bullets stitching across his chest before he could even turn toward the muzzle flash. Lieutenant Colonel James Kinnard watched Martinez fall through his field glasses and immediately understood that everything the intelligence briefings had told them was wrong. The Japanese weren't defending from fixed positions. They weren't even defending the beach in any conventional sense. The machine gun that killed Martinez fired for exactly 8 seconds, then went silent. When Kinnard's radio operator called for artillery on the position, the spotting team reported they could no longer locate the target. The gun had simply vanished. Across Red Beach 1, similar scenes played out as the 26th Marines pushed inland. Staff Sergeant William Chen's squad advanced on what appeared to be an abandoned mortar pit, finding nothing but empty ammunition crates and scattered equipment. As they searched the position, mortar rounds began falling on them from a completely different direction. The shells came in perfect salvos of 4, precisely targeted, then stopped abruptly when Chen's men took cover. When they emerged and continued their advance, the mortars resumed from yet another location. Chen realized with growing unease that the Japanese weren't just invisible, they were watching every move the Marines made. Captain Eugene Sledge pressed forward with his demolition team toward the island's first ridge line, carrying 20-pound satchel charges and pole explosives designed to clear bunkers and cave systems. His men had perfected these techniques on Peleliu and Saipan, where Japanese defenders fought from concrete positions that could be systematically reduced with high explosives. But the caves on Iwo Jima defied every principle of military engineering Sledge had learned. When his team blasted what appeared to be a tunnel entrance, they found themselves staring into a shaft that descended at a 45-degree angle into absolute darkness. The tunnel was wide enough for 3 men to walk abreast, reinforced with steel beams salvaged from merchant ships, and disappeared into the volcanic rock like a subway tunnel. Sledge sent Private Rodriguez down with a flashlight and a Thompson submachine gun. Rodriguez descended 20 feet before his voice echoed back up the shaft. "Captain, this thing goes on forever. There's other tunnels branching off. I can hear voices, but they sound like they're coming from everywhere at once." When Rodriguez didn't return after 5 minutes, Sledge sent down Private Williams with orders to bring Rodriguez back immediately. Williams found Rodriguez's helmet and flashlight at a junction where the main tunnel split into 4 separate passages. The voices were still there, speaking in Japanese, but they seemed to come from the walls themselves. The tunnel system that swallowed Rodriguez and Williams was the creation of General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, a 54-year-old career officer who had spent 8 months transforming Iwo Jima into the most sophisticated fortress in military history. While American bombers pounded the island's surface installations day after day, Kuribayashi's engineers worked underground with mining equipment, concrete mixers, and thousands of Korean laborers to carve a subterranean city from solid volcanic rock. The main tunnel ran north to south for over a mile, with dozens of lateral passages connecting firing positions, ammunition storage areas, command posts, and living quarters for an entire army. Kuribayashi had studied American amphibious tactics for 2 years, analyzing every landing from Guadalcanal to the Philippines. He understood that Marines expected to fight Japanese soldiers who would charge their positions in desperate banzai attacks or defend fixed bunkers until overwhelmed. Instead, he designed a defense that violated every assumption American commanders held about Japanese military doctrine. His soldiers would remain invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. They would strike without warning, then disappear before the Marines could retaliate. Most importantly, they would never retreat because retreat was impossible. The tunnels had no exit except through the American lines. By noon on the first day, Kinnard's battalion had advanced 400 yards inland and suffered 87 casualties without killing a single confirmed Japanese defender. His radio crackled constantly with reports from squad leaders describing the same impossible phenomenon: enemy fire from positions that didn't exist, voices in the darkness of tunnels that led nowhere, and the growing realization that they were fighting an enemy who could appear and disappear at will. Sergeant Major James Johnson moved between the forward positions, coordinating engineer teams and ammunition resupply while trying to make sense of the tactical situation. Johnson had fought in France during the First World War, where trenches at least stayed in the same place and enemy positions could be mapped and targeted. On Iwo Jima, the battlefield itself seemed alive and hostile. Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes that hadn't existed moments before, fired at Marines from concealed positions, then vanished back underground before anyone could return fire. Johnson watched a flamethrower team incinerate a suspected cave entrance, only to take rifle fire from 2 other caves that opened simultaneously 50 yards away. The psychological impact on the Marines was immediate and profound. They had trained to fight an enemy they could see, locate, and destroy through superior firepower and tactical coordination. Instead, they found themselves shooting at shadows, advancing toward objectives that turned out to be empty, and losing men to an opponent who remained perpetually invisible. The island's volcanic terrain absorbed sound strangely, so muzzle flashes appeared without the crack of rifle fire, and voices seemed to come from empty air. As the sun set on February 19th, Kinnard established his command post in a shell crater 400 yards from Red Beach 1, surrounded by the equipment and supply dumps that marked the high water mark of the first day's advance. His casualties mounted steadily through the night as Japanese infiltrators emerged from tunnels to attack supply lines, communication cables, and isolated outposts before disappearing back underground. The Marines had landed 20,000 men on Iwo Jima and controlled less than 1 square mile of worthless volcanic ash. Somewhere beneath their feet, 22,000 Japanese soldiers moved through 16,000 feet of interconnected tunnels, invisible as ghosts and twice as deadly. On the morning of March 2, 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Kinnard stood outside a cave entrance that had cost his regiment 14 casualties to capture, watching Captain Eugene Sledge prepare another demolition charge. The cave mouth opened into darkness like a wound in the volcanic rock, and intelligence estimated it connected to at least 6 other positions along the ridgeline. For 11 days, Marines had followed the same tactical doctrine that had worked on every other Pacific island: blast the cave, clear the debris, send in a fire team to mop up any survivors. But the survivors were never there when the Marines went in, and within hours the same positions were firing at them again from angles that made no tactical sense. Sledge had grown increasingly frustrated with the conventional approach. His demolition teams were exhausting their supplies of TNT and satchel charges without achieving permanent results. The Japanese defenders seemed to flow through the underground network like water, abandoning positions only to reoccupy them through secondary tunnels that didn't appear on any map. When his men cleared a cave system and declared it secure, enemy fire would resume from the same coordinates within hours, as if the Japanese soldiers were regenerating from the volcanic rock itself. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Staff Sergeant William Chen had been observing Japanese tactics for 2 weeks when he noticed something crucial about their movement patterns. The enemy never retreated in the conventional sense of abandoning territory and falling back to secondary positions. Instead, they withdrew through tunnels to adjacent fighting positions that were already prepared and supplied. Chen realized that the Japanese weren't defending individual caves or bunkers. They were defending an entire underground transportation network that allowed them to reinforce any threatened position instantly. Chen brought his observations to Kinnard during the evening briefing on March 1st. If the Japanese strength came from their ability to move freely through the tunnel system, Chen argued, then the Marines needed to focus on restricting that mobility, rather than trying to kill every defender in every position. Instead of blasting caves open and clearing them room by room, what if they sealed the entrances permanently after clearing them? The idea violated everything the Marines had been taught about seizing and holding terrain, but Chen's logic was undeniable. You couldn't hold ground that your enemy could retake through tunnels you couldn't even find. Kinnard authorized Chen to test the concept on a limited scale. On March 2nd, Chen's squad approached a cave complex that had been firing at them intermittently for 3 days. Instead of the usual frontal assault, Chen positioned his men to cover all known exits while Sledge prepared his charges. The demolition sequence began with flamethrowers clearing the immediate entrance area, followed by satchel charges to kill or drive out any defenders inside. But instead of sending in a fire team to secure the position, Chen's men immediately began packing the entrance with rocks, debris, and concrete from destroyed Japanese fortifications. The sealing process took 40 minutes of dangerous work under intermittent sniper fire from adjacent positions. Marine engineers used pneumatic jackhammers to break up concrete blocks, while riflemen fed a steady stream of volcanic rock and steel reinforcement into the cave mouth. When they finished, the entrance was completely blocked by a wall of debris 3 feet thick and reinforced with concrete poured from 5-gallon cans. The cave system that had housed an estimated squad of Japanese defenders was now permanently inaccessible from that direction. The immediate results were encouraging but not decisive. Japanese fire from adjacent positions continued, but the volume decreased noticeably. More importantly, the Marines observed something they had never seen before: enemy soldiers attempting to reopen the sealed entrance from inside. Throughout the night, Chen's men heard digging sounds from behind the concrete barrier, along with muffled voices speaking in Japanese. By dawn, small gaps had appeared in the seal where Japanese soldiers had managed to remove some of the debris, but the main entrance remained blocked. Sledge refined the technique over the next week, working with Marine engineers to develop more effective sealing methods. The standard procedure evolved into what the Marines began calling blowtorch and corkscrew. Flamethrowers to clear the entrance area of defenders, followed by explosive charges to collapse any immediate tunnel branches, then systematic packing of the opening with concrete and steel. The engineers discovered that rebar from destroyed Japanese installations, when bent and twisted into the concrete seal, made the barriers nearly impossible for trapped defenders to break through from inside. The psychological impact of the sealing strategy became apparent within days. Captain Tetsuya Oishi, commanding a company of Japanese defenders in the central sector, sent increasingly desperate radio messages to General Kuribayashi describing the American tactics. His soldiers were trained to fight and die in their positions, but they had never prepared for the possibility of being entombed alive. The tunnel network that had been their greatest strength was becoming a trap, as more entrances were permanently sealed. Oishi's men began exhibiting behavior that violated their military training and cultural conditioning. Instead of remaining in concealed positions until American forces approached, they started emerging from caves to engage Marines at longer ranges, hoping to drive them away before the sealing process could begin. This tactical shift played directly into American advantages in firepower and air support. Japanese soldiers who revealed their positions prematurely could be targeted with artillery, naval gunfire, and close air support with devastating effectiveness. The success of the sealing strategy spread through the 5th Marine Division as word passed from unit to unit. Lieutenant Rodriguez, whose squad had lost 6 men trying to clear a fortified cave system, watched Marine engineers seal the position in less than 2 hours with 0 casualties. The cave that had dominated his sector for a week was permanently neutralized, and the Japanese fire that had pinned down his platoon stopped completely. Within 48 hours, Rodriguez was requesting engineer support for sealing operations across his entire front. Sergeant Major Johnson coordinated the expanded sealing program, working with regimental supply to ensure adequate stocks of concrete, rebar, and demolition, charges for the new tactics. The logistical requirements were significant. Each sealing operation required approximately 200 pounds of concrete, 50 pounds of steel reinforcement, and a dozen satchel charges, but the results justified the investment. Positions that had previously required days of costly fighting to secure were being neutralized in hours with minimal casualties. By March 10th, Marine units across Iwo Jima were requesting engineer support for sealing operations. The 27th Marines reported sealing 16 cave entrances in a single day, permanently removing them as sources of enemy fire. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders was becoming increasingly evident as intercepted radio transmissions revealed growing desperation among enemy commanders. General Kuribayashi's carefully constructed defense system was being systematically dismantled not through superior firepower, but through a tactical innovation that turned the tunnel network from an asset into a liability. The Marines had discovered that sometimes the most effective way to defeat an enemy was not to kill him, but to make him irrelevant. On March 15, 1945, at 0730 hours, Captain Eugene Sledge watched his demolition team seal their 68th cave entrance in the 5th Marine Division's sector, a number that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks earlier. The rhythmic sound of pneumatic jackhammers echoed across the volcanic ridge as Marine engineers packed concrete and twisted rebar into another tunnel mouth that had housed Japanese defenders for months. What had begun as an experimental tactic was now transforming the entire character of the battle for Iwo Jima. The underground fortress that General Kuribayashi had spent 8 months constructing was being systematically converted into a tomb. Staff Sergeant William Chen moved between sealing sites with the efficiency of a factory supervisor, coordinating demolition charges, concrete pours, and security details across a front that stretched for 800 yards. His innovation had evolved from desperate improvisation into precise military doctrine. Each sealing operation followed an identical sequence. Reconnaissance teams identified cave entrances and mapped their immediate surroundings. Flamethrower crews cleared the approaches of defenders. Demolition specialists collapsed interior passages with satchel charges. An engineering team sealed the entrance with reinforced concrete barriers that could withstand sustained assault from inside. The psychological transformation of the Japanese defenders was becoming increasingly evident through intercepted radio communications and the testimony of the few prisoners taken alive. Captain Tetsuya Oishi's company, which had controlled a network of connected caves along the central ridge, was now reduced to 3 isolated positions after Marines sealed 14 tunnel entrances in their sector. Oishi's radio, transmissions to division headquarters revealed growing desperation as his men reported being trapped in underground chambers with dwindling supplies and no means of escape or reinforcement. The claustrophobic terror of the sealed caves was unlike anything Japanese soldiers had been trained to endure. Their military culture emphasized honorable death in combat, but being entombed alive violated fundamental concepts of warrior dignity. Intercepted transmissions revealed soldiers pleading with their commanders to authorize breakout attempts, even when such attacks were tactically suicidal. The tunnel network that had been designed as an impregnable fortress was becoming a source of psychological breakdown as defenders realized they were fighting not just for victory, but for the right to die in daylight. Lieutenant Colonel Kinnard observed the psychological impact during a forward reconnaissance on March 16th. His patrol encountered a Japanese soldier emerging from a supposedly sealed cave system, disoriented and carrying no weapon. The man had been trapped underground for 4 days after Marines sealed his unit's primary entrance, surviving on emergency rations and water collected from condensation on tunnel walls. When questioned through a translator, he described the sound of concrete being poured overhead as the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced, worse than artillery bombardment or flamethrower attacks, because it meant permanent entombment rather than quick death. The tactical implications extended beyond individual psychology to operational level effects across the entire Japanese defense. General Kuribayashi's strategy had depended on the ability to reinforce threatened positions instantly through the tunnel network. When Marines attacked a cave system, defenders from adjacent areas could move underground to provide supporting fire or replace casualties. The sealing operations severed these connections, isolating Japanese units and preventing the coordinated defense that had made Iwo Jima so costly for American forces. Sergeant Major Johnson documented the operational impact through careful analysis of casualty reports and territorial gains. During the first 2 weeks of the battle, Marine casualties averaged 47 per day, while territorial gains measured less than 100 yards daily. After the implementation of systematic sealing operations, casualties dropped to 19 per day, while territorial gains increased to over 300 yards daily. The numbers represented more than statistical improvement. They reflected a fundamental shift in the tactical balance of the campaign. The success of sealing operations created new challenges for Marine logistics and engineering support. Each sealed cave required approximately 2 tons of concrete, steel reinforcement, and construction materials that had to be transported across difficult terrain under enemy fire. Regimental supply officers worked with Navy construction, battalions to establish concrete mixing stations near the front lines, using portable equipment originally designed for airfield construction. The engineering effort required to seal caves systematically was almost as complex as the original Japanese construction project. Japanese attempts to counter the sealing strategy revealed the desperation of their tactical situation. On March 18th, Oishi launched a coordinated attack designed to reopen sealed tunnel entrances in his sector. His remaining soldiers emerged from concealed positions simultaneously, attacking Marine engineering teams with small arms, grenades, and improvised explosive devices. The attack succeeded in temporarily reopening 3 sealed caves, but at the cost of exposing Japanese positions to devastating American firepower. Artillery observers called in immediate fire missions that killed 37 Japanese soldiers and wounded dozens more, while the caves were resealed within hours using doubled concrete barriers. The psychological effect of failed breakout attempts further demoralized Japanese defenders throughout the island. Radio intercepts revealed soldiers discussing surrender for the first time in the campaign, though such conversations violated fundamental military and cultural taboos. The prospect of slow death by starvation or suffocation in sealed tunnels was proving more psychologically devastating than the certainty of death in combat. Marine units began reporting enemy behavior that contradicted everything intelligence had predicted about Japanese defensive tactics. Instead of remaining concealed until American forces approached their positions, Japanese soldiers were emerging from caves prematurely to engage at longer ranges. This tactical shift reflected their desperation to avoid being sealed underground, but it played directly into American advantages in firepower and air support. Japanese soldiers who revealed their positions could be targeted with precision artillery, naval gunfire, and close air support that had been ineffective against concealed tunnel entrances. The transformation was most evident during night operations, when Japanese infiltration tactics had previously been most effective. Defenders who might have remained hidden during daylight hours were now emerging after dark to attack Marine positions, hoping to drive them away from cave systems before sealing operations could resume. These night attacks were costly failures that further reduced Japanese combat strength, while providing American forces with target opportunities that had previously been unavailable. By March 20th, intelligence estimates indicated that over 200 cave entrances had been permanently sealed across the island, effectively neutralizing approximately 30% of the Japanese tunnel network. The remaining defenders were increasingly isolated in shrinking pockets of resistance, cut off from mutual support and facing the prospect of eventual entombment as Marine sealing operations continued their systematic advance. General Kuribayashi's fortress beneath Iwo Jima was being methodically converted from an underground city into an underground cemetery, one concrete seal at a time. On March 24th, 1945, at 0645 hours, Lieutenant Colonel Kinnard crouched behind a destroyed Sherman tank at the northern tip of Iwo Jima. staring at the final cluster of cave entrances that represented the last organized Japanese resistance on the island. The sulfur-stained volcanic rock stretched ahead for less than 200 yards before dropping into the sea. But those 200 yards contained the survivors of General Kuribayashi's 22,000-man garrison. Intelligence estimated fewer than 300 Japanese soldiers remained alive and capable of fighting, trapped in a network of interconnected caves with no possibility of escape except through the marine lines. Captain Eugene Sledge moved methodically from position to position, coordinating the final sealing operations with the mechanical precision of a factory foreman. His demolition teams had sealed over 90 cave entrances during the past 3 weeks, transforming from improvised experimenters into specialists in underground warfare. The techniques they had developed through trial and error were now being documented for future military operations. But Sledge found no satisfaction in the technical achievement. The caves they were sealing contained men who were no longer fighting for strategic objectives or tactical advantages. They were fighting for the right to die above ground rather than suffocate in darkness. The psychological toll on the Marines was becoming increasingly evident as the campaign neared its end. Sergeant Major Johnson observed his men working with grim efficiency that lacked the aggressive enthusiasm of earlier operations. Sealing caves had proven more effective than direct assault, but it required Marines to listen to Japanese soldiers trapped behind concrete barriers, scratching at the reinforced seals with improvised tools, and calling out in voices that grew weaker each day. The sounds from sealed caves haunted Marine positions throughout the night, creating a psychological burden that conventional combat had never imposed. The final Japanese positions clustered around what intelligence designated Cave Complex Alpha, a series of interconnected tunnels that extended nearly 100 feet into the volcanic rock and descended 3 levels below the surface. General Kuribayashi had established his final command post in the deepest chamber, surrounded by the remnants of his staff and the most determined defenders who had survived 5 weeks of systematic isolation. Radio intercepts indicated that ammunition was nearly exhausted, medical supplies were non-existent, and water rations had been reduced to less than 1 cup per man per day. Staff Sergeant William Chen approached Cave Complex Alpha with the same tactical methodology he had developed throughout the campaign, but the final sealing operation presented unique challenges that tested every innovation his teams had created. The cave system had 4 known entrances connected by tunnels that allowed defenders to shift between positions, making it impossible to seal individual openings without risking the emergence of trapped soldiers from alternate exits. Chen realized that the final phase of the battle would require simultaneous sealing of all entrances to prevent Japanese soldiers from escaping the trap they had helped create. The complexity of the final operation required coordination between demolition teams, flamethrower crews, rifle companies, and engineering units across a front that spanned 300 yards. Each entrance had to be cleared and sealed within minutes of the others to prevent defenders from concentrating at remaining openings. Kinnard positioned his remaining effective strength to ensure that no Japanese soldier could escape the final encirclement, but the tactical requirements felt more like organizing an execution than conducting military operations. Captain Tetsuya Oishi transmitted his final radio message to General Kuribayashi at 08:15 hours on March 24th, reporting that Marine sealing operations had isolated his remaining soldiers in chambers that were rapidly becoming uninhabitable. Oishi's company had been reduced to 11 effective fighters, with no ammunition except what individual soldiers carried, and no medical supplies for the 14 wounded men who lay dying in the deepest sections of the tunnel system. His transmission ended with a request for permission to attempt a final breakout attack, not because success was possible, but because death in combat was preferable to slow suffocation underground. Kuribayashi's response, intercepted by Marine radio intelligence, reflected the complete collapse of Japanese defensive strategy on Iwo Jima. The general authorized individual commanders to act according to their judgment, effectively releasing his soldiers from the discipline that had kept them fighting in impossible conditions for 34 days. The transmission marked the end of organized resistance and the beginning of individual decisions about how to die with whatever dignity circumstances permitted. The final sealing operations began at 0930 hours with simultaneous flamethrower attacks on all 4 entrances to Cave Complex Alpha. Marine crews advanced under covering fire from rifle companies positioned to prevent Japanese breakout attempts, while demolition teams prepared satchel charges designed to collapse interior passages before concrete seals could be installed. The coordination required precise timing that left no margin for error or tactical improvisation. Japanese resistance to the final assault was sporadic and desperate rather than tactically coherent. Soldiers emerged from cave entrances firing weapons until their ammunition was exhausted, then continued fighting with bayonets, entrenching tools, and improvised weapons until they were killed or wounded beyond the ability to continue. The combat lasted less than 30 minutes, but the psychological impact on Marines was profound as they watched enemy soldiers choose certain death over the possibility of surrender or survival underground. The actual sealing process took 4 hours of intensive work by Marine engineers who poured reinforced concrete barriers while listening to voices from inside the sealed chambers. The sounds gradually diminished as trapped air was consumed and carbon dioxide levels increased, creating conditions that made survival impossible within hours rather than days. By late afternoon, on March 24th, the final organized Japanese position on Iwo Jima had been permanently sealed beneath tons of concrete and volcanic rock. Kinnard established his final command post on the northern shore of Iwo Jima at 1700 hours, overlooking black volcanic sand that stretched toward the open Pacific. The island that had cost his regiment 437 casualties was finally secure, but victory felt hollow rather than triumphant. The Marines had developed tactical innovations that would influence future military operations, but they had also participated in warfare that violated traditional concepts of honorable combat between professional soldiers. The silence that settled over Iwo Jima on the evening of March 24th was absolute in ways that conventional battlefield victories had never achieved. There were no surviving enemy soldiers to be taken prisoner, no wounded to be evacuated, no equipment to be captured or destroyed. The Japanese garrison had not been defeated in the traditional sense of being killed or forced to surrender. They had been sealed beneath the island they had died defending, entombed in tunnels that had become their monument and their grave. On March 26, 1945, at 1100 hours, the battle for Iwo Jima was officially declared over when the last organized Japanese resistance ceased on the island's northern shore. Lieutenant Colonel James Kinnard stood among the concrete seals that marked the final cave positions, watching Navy photographers document the tactical innovations that had transformed one of the Pacific War's most costly campaigns into a case study in adaptive warfare. The photographs would appear in classified military reports for decades, but they could not capture the psychological weight that settled over the Marines, who had participated in operations that violated every traditional concept of honorable combat. The immediate aftermath of the sealing campaign presented challenges that conventional victory had never imposed. Marine engineers faced the task of ensuring that sealed cave systems remained permanently inaccessible, requiring ongoing maintenance of concrete barriers and monitoring for signs of structural failure that might allow trapped gases to escape. The volcanic activity beneath Iwo Jima created unique geological conditions that made the sealed tunnels potentially dangerous for years after the battle ended, as decomposition and chemical reactions in the enclosed spaces produced toxic gases that could leak through cracks in the concrete. Captain Eugene Sledge supervised the final technical documentation of sealing procedures, working with Marine Corps engineers to create detailed reports that would be studied at military academies throughout the post-war period. His teams had sealed 137 cave entrances during the campaign, trapping an estimated 800 Japanese soldiers in underground chambers that had become their permanent tombs. The tactical success was undeniable, but Sledge struggled with the psychological implications of warfare that emphasized entombment rather than direct combat between professional soldiers. Staff Sergeant William Chen received orders to report to Marine Corps headquarters in Washington for debriefing sessions that would inform future military doctrine. His innovation had reduced Marine casualties by approximately 40% during the final 3 weeks of the campaign, while accelerating territorial gains that conventional assault tactics had failed to achieve. Military strategists wanted to understand how tunnel sealing could be applied to future conflicts, particularly in Asia, where cave warfare was expected to become increasingly common as American forces advanced toward Japan. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese soldiers who witnessed the sealing operations became evident through prisoner interrogations and captured documents recovered after the battle. Captain Tetsuya Oishi's final diary entries, found in a sealed command bunker, describe the tunnel network's transformation from protective fortress to claustrophobic trap. Oishi wrote that the sound of concrete being poured overhead was more terrifying than artillery bombardment because it represented permanent entrapment rather than quick death, violating fundamental cultural concepts about honorable military service. Sergeant Major Johnson coordinated veteran interviews for historical documentation projects that would preserve first-hand accounts of the sealing operations. The interviews revealed consistent psychological patterns among Marines who had participated in tunnel warfare, including recurring nightmares about sounds from sealed caves and persistent anxiety about enclosed spaces that affected many veterans for years after returning home. The tactical innovation that had saved lives during the campaign created long-term psychological burdens that conventional combat had never imposed on American forces. The broader military implications of the Iwo Jima sealing campaign became apparent as American forces prepared for the invasion of Japan. Intelligence. Estimates suggested that Japanese home islands contained thousands of cave systems and underground fortifications designed along similar principles to those encountered on Iwo Jima. Military planners incorporated tunnel sealing into operational doctrine for future amphibious assaults, recognizing that conventional tactics would be inadequate against defenders who could disappear underground and re-emerge without warning. The development of specialized equipment for tunnel warfare accelerated throughout 1945 as military engineers refined techniques pioneered by Marine units on Iwo Jima. Portable concrete mixers, reinforced sealing materials, and rapid-setting chemical compounds were developed specifically for cave sealing operations. The logistical requirements for large-scale tunnel warfare were incorporated into invasion planning for Japan, where American forces expected to encounter cave systems that dwarfed anything seen in the Pacific Island campaigns. Academic study of the Iwo Jima tunnel sealing began within months of the battle's conclusion, as military historians recognized the tactical innovation's significance for future warfare. The Army War College established a specialized curriculum for cave warfare tactics, using detailed reports from Marine veterans to train officers who might face similar challenges in future conflicts. The psychological aspects of tunnel sealing received equal attention from military psychiatrists who studied the long-term mental health implications for soldiers who participated in such operations. The Korean War provided the first operational test of tunnel sealing doctrine, developed from Iwo Jima experience. American forces encountered extensive cave systems in mountainous terrain that required adapted versions of the tactics pioneered by Marine units in the Pacific. The success of tunnel sealing operations in Korea validated the tactical innovations developed during the final weeks of fighting on Iwo Jima, while also revealing new challenges associated with cave warfare in different geological and climatic conditions. Veterans of the Iwo Jima sealing operations maintained contact through informal networks that provided psychological support for men who had participated in warfare that existing military culture had no framework to understand or validate. Annual reunions became forums for discussing the long-term psychological impact of tactical decisions that had been necessary for military success, but violated traditional concepts of combat honor. The conversations revealed that tactical innovation often carried personal costs that were not apparent during the immediate operational period. The legacy of tunnel sealing extended beyond specific military applications to broader questions about the nature of warfare and the psychological burden imposed on soldiers who must adapt to increasingly complex tactical requirements. The Marines who developed sealing techniques on Iwo Jima had demonstrated remarkable tactical flexibility under extreme pressure, but they had also participated in operations that challenged fundamental assumptions about military honor and the proper conduct of warfare between professional soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Kinnard received the Bronze Star for his leadership during the Iwo Jima campaign, with specific recognition for his role in implementing tactical innovations that reduced casualties and accelerated victory. The citation mentioned his adaptation to unconventional warfare requirements, but it could not acknowledge the psychological complexity of commanding operations that emphasized entombment over direct combat. For Kinnard and thousands of Marines who served on Iwo Jima, the most important victory was not the tactical success they achieved, but the survival that allowed them to return home and attempt to reconcile their wartime experiences with peacetime concepts of military honor and human dignity.